I get so happy when people of all ages ask me to do their nails. This client is in her late 70s and she told me that she's been doing her own nails her whole life. Since being diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, her joints in her hands have been in so much pain that she no longer can do her nails, so she decided to come to me. She told me stories of her past, how she fled to America during World War II, how she built a life from nothing but a few dollars in her pocket. When I finished, she told me that even with all the obstacles in her life, she feels fulfilled. I lived a beautiful life, she said, and I only wish the same for you. Remember this client who got screwed over by her ex? Well, she came back for an appointment with more stories. After getting somewhat back on her feet, she decided to take a much-needed getaway to visit her best friend up in New York City. She thought she could turn to her friend for guidance and support, but she was wrong. After moving to New York City, her friend changed. She became mentally and emotionally abusive both to herself and others. My client had a rude awakening when she was left outside in a city she didn't know, while her so-called best friend got high on horse tranquilizers with a complete stranger. After all of that, my client stuck around to see if she was okay, just to find her strutting down her rooftop ledge, threatening her life. She was ready to end the friendship, but realized her friend needed more help and support than she ever did. Again, lawyer edition. My client used to be a criminal prosecutor. Let me tell you one of his crazy stories. So one day, two guys wanted to rob a jewelry store. They decided the best way to learn the ins and outs of the store was to abduct the security guard. One of these kidnappers pulled the guard into a van to try to get some info out of him, but the guard fought back. He fought back so much that the kidnapper shot him in the head while the other was driving. So at this point, while being shot in the head, the guard managed to roll himself out of the moving van while the kidnappers tried to flee the scene. While bleeding, the guard crawled to his car and drove himself to the hospital. Is a housekeeper, and because she works with her hands for a living and is constantly working with various cleaning chemicals, she says her gel starts chipping within a week. She peels the remaining gel off due to stress and anxiety because she works for a busy hotel chain trying to provide for her two little boys at home. She said she works 10-hour shifts and having to redo her nails every week is just not something that she could afford or keep up with. Her friend actually recommended me, hoping I'd be able to help, which was very sweet. I'm doing a structured gel manicure with a rubber base, which should last her up to a month. Because she needs to keep her nails short for work, she usually just gets a basic color because she thinks beautiful designs only look good on long nails. But I'm hoping I changed her mind with these pink cat eye swirls. She left with a big smile and I could just tell how happy they made her.
Story time. I babysat a lot of kids in my neighborhood, and there was this one night that I was babysitting a 2-year-old. It was around 10 o'clock at night, so the kid was sleeping, and I was just sitting in the living room. In the living room, there was a big TV, a couch, and then behind me, it was a wall with a giant window. So it was really late at night, I had nothing to do, so I was Snapchatting my friends. If you Snapchat anybody, I'm sure you know that sometimes you Snapchat really fast. You don't even know or look at what you're sending. I was mass snapping all my friends, and then one of them replied 10 minutes later. And he said, "Who's that guy behind you?" And I turned around and no one was there, so I'm like, he's playing a joke on me. But then I get another Snapchat from this friend I had, and she lives all the way across the country. They don't know each other. And she said, "I think there's someone outside." So I was really freaked out because I was alone. There was a giant window behind me. Apparently there was someone outside. I wasn't gonna call the child's parents because I didn't want to freak them out, but I was scared. So then I went around the house, locked all of the doors. Sorry, it's a really long story.
Crazy story time about how my sister and I found out that we were hooking up with the same guy. So I was a freshman, my sister was a sophomore, and there was this really cute guy in her grade that I liked. But I could never find a way to talk to him because we weren't in the same grade and had none of the same classes. And my sister and I were not close at all. Like, we didn't tell each other shit. We didn't really talk to each other or anything. So by that being said, we never told each other about the boys that we liked. We just didn't have that bond. Well, track season came around. So they called all the people down who wanted to do track. And I saw him walk past my classroom window, so I decided to go too. So I signed up for track, and him and I started to talk a little bit. We exchanged numbers. And he was popular, I wasn't, so he didn't want to be seen with me. So after attendance, we would go to this graveyard right by the track and hook up. Well, the next day we had a meet at our school. So him and I went to the graveyard, hooked up, and that's when it started getting crazy like for part 2.
I never really talk about myself on here, but I think this is a story worth sharing. I was born with a birthmark in the center of my forehead. It looked very similar to a traditional bindi worn in the Hindu culture. I was told all my life by my family what a blessing it is to have this beauty mark because of its meaning, but unfortunately others thought differently. I would get weird looks from random strangers and was bullied at school for most of my childhood. Kids would call me ugly and worthless. No one even wanted to be my friend or sit next to me at lunch. And for what? Just because someone looks a little different or has something unique about them? Back then I really cared about what others thought, I took words to heart, and because of that I lacked confidence for years. And I'm positive I'm not the only one. I wish someone told me this back then, but being unique isn't a bad thing. It only makes you stronger. Embrace it.
I literally want to cry. So if you didn't know, I have a sister, and her name's Ashley. And we both have boyfriends. And every night we both fall asleep on the phone with our boyfriends. So one day we're all hanging out and we're like just talking. And my sister's boyfriend looks at me and he's like, "You need to stop going into your sister's room in the middle of the night." And I look at him and I'm like, "What are you talking about? I don't have a reason to go into her room. Like I don't go into her room, especially in the middle of the night." Then my boyfriend hops in the conversation and he's like, No. He's like, "No, I hear Ashley go into Kayla's room every night and stare at her." So me and my sister both look at each other and we're like, "We don't go into each other's rooms, do we?" And we agreed that we do not. And they said this has been going on for months. So for months, somebody or something has been going into me and my sister's room for about 15 minutes every night and watching us sleep. But it only gets worse.
Story time about how I found out my husband was cheating on me with his stepsister and her best friend. My husband and I had been married for 5 years. We were living in another state when he was fired from work and my job wasn't paying well enough. We decided to move in with his family until we could figure things out and get back on our feet. He had a stepsister and she was drop dead gorgeous. Since he didn't have a job, he would spend most of his time at home while I dropped off our son at daycare and then went to work. When I would get home, he'd go to the bar. At first, I thought things were normal and he was just stressed out about not being able to find work. However, I started getting suspicious once he started being a little aggressive towards me. He stopped wanting to talk to me as often and barely slept next to me anymore. His parents planned a trip to Europe and asked us to take care of the house while they were gone, to which we agreed. I noticed whenever I wasn't home, he would be home alone with his stepsister, and whenever I got back, they would both leave. I also noticed he wasn't trying very hard to find a job, leaving all the responsibilities to me. One day I was calling him while I was at work and he wasn't picking up. I had a bad feeling and asked my boss if I could leave early. Thankfully, my boss was nice and let me go. When I got home, I heard 2 girls giggling and the sound of a guy huffing coming from our room upstairs. What I saw next left me devastated.
Story time about my psychotic best friend. So we're gonna call this girl Gia. So a little background information. This all happened whenever I was in 9th grade. I saw Gia sitting at this lunch table alone and I invited her to come sit with my friends and I. And after talking to her, I found out that she was a new student and she didn't have any friends. So her and I started hanging out and we became really close. Like she would come over my house 24/7. Well, my older sister was a grade above us and she would act really weird around her. And by weird, I mean like she would always make fun of me in front of my sister. And weirdly enough, try to cause problems between us. My sister didn't really like her. She thought that she was weird, but because she was my friend, she was being super nice to her. Well, like a month later, she started trying to become best friends with my sister. Like any conversation she would have, I would be like, "Oh, do you want to come over?" She would be like, "No, sorry, I'm hanging out with your sister today." And I would go home and I would be like, "Hey, are you hanging out with Gia today?" And my sister would be like, "What the hell are you talking about? Like for part 2.